Today, I'd like to talk about the testimony of Paul. And Paul was an interesting guy in general, a very smart man, very learned man, very high ranking and moving up quickly in the ranks of the Pharisee sect of Judaism. And he gives this testimony. I want to share this with you, what he says in 1 Corinthians 15, starting at verse 1. Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. For what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. For I am the least of the apostles, and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. Whether then it was I or they, this is what we preach, and this is what you believed. The Apostle Paul was what he was doing at the beginning of the church was he was going to various cities and rounding up the people who were Christians at that time, before they were called Christians, and bringing them back to Jerusalem and having them imprisoned. And as he testifies before King Agrippa in Acts 26, that when they were putting them to death, he would cast his vote against the apostle or against the Christians of that time. The question is, what would make a guy like that change his mind? What would it take for him to go from actively rounding up Christians and having them put to death to being one of its leading apologists? All right. The thing that separates the Christian worldview, and I've shared this in a couple of these videos now, is the eyewitness testimony of the people that were there and whether their testimony was credible or not. The Apostle Paul was somebody who was that against the Christian church that he would actually go out and find them and have them put to death. So something very profound would have had to have happened for that for him to change. There have been some who say that Paul actually infiltrated the church and led it off in a direction Jesus never meant for it to go. Well, that is not true. I mean, all of his writings, there's nothing in his writings or any of the epistles that he wrote that is any different than what Jesus taught or that the other apostles taught. So that's just patently not true. And if he were trying to lead it away from its original intent, wouldn't you think he would lead it more towards the Pharisees, more towards the Judaism? When he had a chance to join the circumcision group, he did not do that. He was opposed to circumcision being imposed on Gentiles. If he were actually trying to do that, he would lead them back in a way that he had believed in the first place. If he were trying to do that, not in the direction he actually took it. So that assertion has no basis in reality. But something had to happen for this guy to make that change. He had to have, as what he said is, Jesus appeared to him as to one abnormally born because he had persecuted the church. So his testimony is very profound and very effective in being evidence for the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for the truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I believe God had him in that position for that very purpose, is to be that profound witness for the gospel. As it's written in Hebrews, we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses for the gospel of Jesus Christ. No other worldview has that. Certainly not materialism. Certainly not Buddhism or Hinduism or any of the Eastern religions. Certainly not Islam, as its only adherent is Muhammad, one guy. Nobody else is even allowed to come and contradict what he had written under Islamic rules. So it's a very profound thing when a guy like Paul makes that change. And what he asserts is there were 500 people who saw the risen Christ all at one time. In a trial, if you had 500 people testifying to the same event, I mean, there would be little doubt about the veracity of that event. And certainly, as somebody who, like Paul, who was so against the church that he sought to destroy it, his changing his mind is powerful evidence for the veracity of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, what I want you to think about, though, is if that's the case, why are you holding on to these false worldviews? What's it going to take to make you change your mind in the light of this evidence? I mean, again, evidence is one of those things you can believe it or you cannot believe it, but it's your belief or your unbelief is not the evidence itself. The evidence is that Paul had a revelation from Jesus Christ, and he changed his mind once he received it. He changed the kind of guy he was. He changed everything about his worldview, his Judaic worldview. Not that it was necessarily wrong, only that the final revelation of Judaism is found in Jesus Christ, and he came to that conclusion. And he was so learned that he was able to refute the Jews based on the scriptures of the Old Testament, or the Old Covenant, as it were. And so his testimony is very powerful testimony because of those things. And that's something you need to take into account as you're trying to wrestle with truth and what that actually is. This will wrap up the portion that I'm going to use. I've pointed to the testimony of Thomas and the testimony of Peter and the testimony of Paul. Those are the only three I'm going to do on that series of that. We'll be talking a little bit about prophecy going forward. But that's what I want you to do. I want you to consider why would these guys have said what they said about Jesus, given the outcomes of their lives. They suffered a great deal holding on to the truth of what they knew, what they testified to, what they saw, what they heard, and often went to gruesome deaths clinging to that truth and expressing that truth to those who were persecuting them. So I want you to keep that in mind as you go forward, that of all the worldviews, only one truly has eyewitness testimony, a variety of eyewitness testimony. Now what you need to do is, what does that mean? What do I need to know, and what do I need to take from that? Because now we're presenting the evidence from a looking back point right now, with the testimony of eyewitnesses to what they saw and heard and what they experienced. But we're going to start going forward and start looking at prophecy and how important that was in recognizing who the Messiah was to be, who the Christ was, the anointed one who would come and take the sins of the world upon himself. That's what the Old Testament was about. That's what it pointed to. And we'll look at some of those things and what they mean before we move out of this section of this teaching. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. Thanks, and have a great day.